Okay. I'm with would we say that it's like a brother from another mother?
Yeah,
Maybe.
that sounds fair. Yeah, why not?
Ted is a better looking one. But I'm here with Dr. Ted Naiman, and he is one of my go-tos for everything body composition. And we have very similar philosophies. And arguably, you also need no introduction, but I'm giving you the intro. You specialize, would you say you specialize in obesity medicine? Body composition has definitely been a forefront for you for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not board certified in obesity medicine or anything, but it is a special interest of mine.
And you are very well known for it. Okay, you ready? So this is the Optimal Body RX, and you are one of my go-tos for body composition. What do you feel, if you were to break it down and think about what are the things that individuals need to do to optimize their body composition? What does that look like in terms of priorities and how you think about it, optimal body composition? And then I guess before we talk about that, do you have in your mind an optimal body composition, a percent body fat, percent muscle mass? What are your thoughts on what is optimal?
Wow. Okay. So I don't have an exact zone because everybody is bracketed by their genetics, right? You've got this high and low body fat that you could be based on the genetics you've inherited, and you're kind of locked into that. And all you can do is go back and forth between your genetic brackets and be, either the worst body composition version of yourself possible or the best. And so like your only goal is to be a little bit better than you were before and aim as high as you can on your own personal genetic bracketing for body composition. And within that, it's pretty basic. Everybody just wants more lean mass and less fat mass. And honestly, if you look at, statistics, the more muscle mass you have, the longer you're going to live. And the lower your fat mass, the longer you're going to live. I mean, you really want to be like higher lean mass, lower fat mass. And it's all about this constant recomp, which is a Sisyphean task where every day you're trying to be a little bit more jacked and leaner than you were the day before. And your only goal is to get to the end of that genetic bracket you're in. And so it kind of doesn't matter what actual number it is, literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what body fat percent you are. It doesn't matter what body fat percent I think you should be. All that matters is being better than you were before and trying to aim as good as possible, the best version of yourself you can be with your genetic brackets.
Yeah, I actually love that because people ask me, and I know that they ask you all the time, what percent body fat? I mean, yes, we would consider over 30% likely an issue for many people. But I think at the higher ends, we can all agree. But what do the more optimal ends look like for people? And again, like you said, there's this genetic component that really is the biggest driver, which is, for example, for me and also for you, I think that there is probably a genetic propensity to exist in a lower body fat and be healthy, right? So it would, be kind of where we are, and that may be somewhat easier for us. But could we always get better? Yeah, like there's always this way of how much lean mass can we have versus, we need, or all these other things, totally genetic. So I really appreciate you saying that because I'm sure the listeners are thinking, okay, that kind of offloads a little bit. In terms of optimizing one's own genetics, how do you think of, number one, diet, right? And I guess we'll start with diet and then perhaps move to kind of physical activity. But if people are really wanting to see results to losing, or do you think about it like this? Do you think about it in terms of losing body fat and building muscle? Do you think about it as building muscle, not addressing body fat? What is the strategy that you use?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of bodybuilders will do this sort of bulk and cut mentality where they're bulking and then they're cutting, bulking, cut. For most people, I think it's more useful to think of it as just this constant kind of main gaining or a recomp or, simultaneously gaining muscle and losing fat, a little bit of both at the same time. I think that's, if you have a really short-term goal and you're a bodybuilder, it's better to bulk and cut. But if you're just an average person who's looking at the long game in your whole life and you're just trying to get the highest lean mass and lowest fat mass, you're just kind of doing this constant recomp thing where you're trying to get more lean mass and less fat mass. And in terms of the diet, it's really, really basic. It really just comes down to protein versus non-protein energy, right? That's the really big picture way to look at it. Anytime you eat protein, you're maximally supporting your lean mass and your muscle. And every time you eat non-protein energy, carbs and fats, you're basically supporting your fat mass. If you really zoom out, every bit of fat you eat gets stored as fat, and every bit of carbohydrate you eat displaces fat oxidation, because you have to burn that off first. And so you're kind of just supplying all your energy with carbs and fats, and protein is there to build lean mass and to build muscle. And as long as you have the anabolic stimulus from resistance training and the protein available, you're going to have a muscle protein synthesis is going to be higher than breakdown. You're going to accrue lean mass, hopefully, again, within these very limited genetic brackets. There's going to be this super hard ceiling for everyone as to how much muscle they can build. And you're very limited, by these genetics. But like big picture with the diet, it's just protein versus non-protein energy. And so you just want to constantly be paying attention to the ratio of protein versus non-protein energy that you're eating and make sure it's nice and high to get the highest lean mass and lowest fat mass.
So what would be an example of that ratio of protein versus a non-protein energy source?
Right. So, if you just look at worldwide humans in general, they're eating about 15% of calories from protein, 15%. In America, over the past 60 or 70 years of the obesity epidemic, we dropped from maybe 15% down to about 12.5% just from protein dilution, from refined carbs and refined fats. And you just watch obesity kind of climb with this drop in protein, because now you have to eat more calories to get the same absolute amount of protein that you had before, because the protein percent is lower. And that's this whole protein leverage phenomenon. And we know really well how that works from, laboratory animals and studies with different dietary protein percents. And, the closer you get down to about 10% protein with, 45% each carbs and fats, the more you're just going to automatically overeat and get fatter, pretty much. So peak obesity would probably be 45% carb, 45% fat, and 10% protein. And we're approaching that asymptotically. We're approaching this here in America, which is not good. So what you see is that anytime protein percent goes up, you tend to have basically weight loss. Like if you look at the database of successful weight loss, in America, like people who've lost, a statistically significant amount of their body weight and kept it off, they're getting protein up to like 19, 20% of their calories and keeping it there long term. And those are people who have successfully lost weight and kept it off. And then if you can get up to, maybe 30% protein, you're going to pretty much reverse any prediabetes. You're going to see major reversals and improvements in any kind of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. And then you've got your bodybuilder crowd. And these are people who basically improve body composition for a living. It's their freaking job. So all these people just live in a 30+% protein range, maybe 30 to 40% protein. You have very few people living at higher percents than that. And then, of course, if you look at worldwide hunter-gatherer macronutrient estimates, they're about 33% protein by calories. And that's because if you just go out in the wild and kill something and eat it, it's pretty, if you just eat some wild game, it's pretty lean. The protein percent's really high. And if you, just eat like leaves off a tree, these things are 40, 50% protein by calories. There's hardly any calories in there, hardly any carbs or fats. So you're really just kind of seeing this higher protein percentage as just automatically giving animals or humans lower body fat.
And what do you think, so you would say if someone wanted, just to recap, insulin resistance, diabetes reversal, really these metabolic syndrome types, an individual is looking at 30% protein, right? And if we're looking for healthy weight maintenance, 19 to 20%. So someone is kind of happy with where they are. And again, we're giving these numbers, but there's probably a capacity to move up and down, whether it's, again, 19, 20% to 30%. So we could essentially say 20 to 30%, you're going to be either maintaining or improving.
Right. And the caveat is these are all for just like lightly active people or sedentary people. So if you're just doing, if you're training for ultra, marathon or Ironman or something, you're doing, 6 hours of training a day or something, you might eat so many calories that your protein's 10%, but you're still just super, super lean. So you have to completely eliminate like huge volumes of exercise from the equation when you're looking at these percents. But then, for someone who's just lightly active or sedentary or whatever, 30% would be an awesome goal for anyone who's trying to reverse their type 2 diabetes, their metabolic syndrome, their insulin resistance. That would absolutely be my advice to anyone who's got metabolic issues, with the caveat that if you're doing tons of exercise, that could be lower.
So also what you're saying is that, again, if we were thinking about lean mass protection, muscle mass, really the two primary ways to stimulate that are dietary protein and exercise. And what I'm hearing you say is that the higher your exercise, potentially the lower the protein percentage can be to maintain that muscle. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, no, I'm just saying you're burning so many calories.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, I'm saying like if you're Michael Phelps and you're in the pool 10 hours a day and you're eating, 6,000 calories, protein might be 5% of your calories, but you're still fine. So I'm mostly talking about people who aren't just doing these huge calorie burns from tons of cardio or something.
Got it.
Because that just muddies the water a lot. But
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, for most of us, that's not really a problem. Like,
I don't know. You look pretty fit. So I know you're a rowing champion or something crazy. So there's that. For an individual, we should talk about that. So for an individual who's physically active, say as physically active as you, and has performance goals, where would potentially your protein percentage fit?
So I do a lot of very brief, very high intensity exercise. So my volumes are actually really tiny and I'm not burning a lot of extra calories. And so I do eat about a 30-something% protein diet pretty much all the time. My goal is, to be around 30% protein most of the time. And if I'm really cutting hard, it could be 40%. So it's just, but again, like I am doing high intensity exercise regularly, but just really tiny bits. So I'm not doing a ton of cardio or a ton of endurance or burning a ton of calories. So if I was, I would probably, get by with a lower percentage.
And then where are your carbohydrates and fats? If someone were making a diet for themselves and thinking, okay, so now I'm going to figure out that I'm going to have about 30% from protein, where does the rest kind of fall into place? How do you think about that?
Gotcha. Okay. So for protein, I like about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, which, if you're lightly, moderately active, is going to be around the 30% range. For carbs, what I like to do is, give most adults about 100 grams of carbs a day, because you need some glucose in your body just to run your, red blood cells in your brain and things that have mitochondria. And so if you don't have that glucose in your diet, you literally have to manufacture it out of protein, which is fine, unless you're not eating enough protein. And then, that's not going to spare protein for muscle anabolism. So I do like giving most people, around 100 grams of carbs a day. And then what you really want to do is match your carbohydrate intake to your carbohydrate needs, which is glycolytic exercise. So I'm saying, maybe roughly 1 gram of carb for every minute of high intensity exercise where you're, 70, 80 or higher percent of your maximum heart rate. And you're just, you're burning a lot of carbs. And you don't have to be super exact about that. But if you're doing an hour of really hard, cardio, throw in another 50 to 100 grams of carbs. So for me, it ends up being like, and I do want everyone to be doing at least, 15 minutes of high intensity exercise a day. So it ends up looking like about 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight in carbs, but making sure you're doing some high intensity exercise every day to earn that. And then of course, if you do way more, you could eat way more carbs.
And why the high intensity versus, say, resistance training or anything else?
Well, you're trying to get your VO2 max higher, right? So like if you look at, if you look at, longevity and health span and lifespan, the things that really, really stand out are number one, the higher your VO2 max, the longer you're going to live. You're going to have less cancer, less dementia, less, neurodegenerative disease of any kind. You're going to have all these longevity and health span benefits from high VO2 max. And you're just not going to max out your VO2 capabilities without pushing that and trying to get an adaptation in that direction, which means doing something where you're redline, you're trying to achieve close to your maximum heart rate, so you can, get adaptations there. So I really like this high end zone 5, let's get your VO2 max higher type thing, because it seems to be so beneficial. And you're just only going to get that adaptation from really high end exercise. It doesn't have to necessarily be for a long period of time. You can always have this seesaw trade-off between intensity and duration, but you get that intensity higher and you're going to get those positive cardio adaptations that you really want. And that's why I'm suggesting this high end, but that does burn a lot of glucose and that does require carbs. And I don't think the optimum carbohydrate intake is 0 for that reason. You want to eat enough so that you can do brief amounts of high intensity exercise and get better cardiorespiratory fitness. So I like a little bit of carb, but like not like 60% of your calories. And then you just sit on the couch. The average American does exactly 0 minutes of high intensity exercise a day. That's an actual statistic. And then they're what's supposed to eat 60% of their calories from carbohydrate. Just doesn't really match up for me.
Yeah. And, I was looking at some of the data, and only 23% of adults meet their physical activity recommendations. And, and the next thought, as you were saying that, the physical activity recommendations are 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity, 2 days a week of resistance training. But I don't know if they have a high intensity interval recommendation. Do you know? Is that something that they have yet added in?
Well, they've made it optional. So it's like you can do 150 minutes of, lower intensity exercise. You can do, 150 of lower intensity or 75 minutes of high intensity vigorous exercise, they call it. So you can do 75 minutes a week of vigorous exercise, which is, 15 minutes, 5 days a week. Okay. And that's just as good as 150 minutes of moderate, which is highlighting this exact seesaw of intensity and duration. You go twice as hard with twice the mets, you can do half the time. And that's absolutely true and accurate if you're just looking at calories, right?
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to improve your VO2 max and get these positive adaptations, you might be better off making sure you're doing some of that high end stuff. And it's just like lifting weights, where you probably want to play the entire rep range and do some high intensity, shorter duration, and some lower intensity, higher duration. But you do want to make sure you have some of that all out type stuff in there, I think, to get the adaptations you're looking for. Just for overall health.
Yeah. And you feel like every day versus say once a week of sprint interval training or something like that. Do you feel that every day? So this would be in place of, say, doing resistance exercise, or is this in addition? If someone were to make a perfect training plan, and obviously there is no perfect training plan. I love resistance exercise, and I also do like high intensity interval training. But is there a formula, do you think, that we could balance for resistance exercise, maybe sprint interval versus HIIT, anything like that?
I mean, I think in terms of frequency, it really just depends on what your overall weekly volume is. You could do a little bit every day, or you could do a whole bunch one day a week, and they're both kind of equivalent. So the good news about that is it gives you a lot of freedom to just do whatever fits your schedule. The bad news about that is some people are so focused on just being perfect and optimal that they're just not even going to do anything until they feel like their plan is perfect. Right. And that's BS. It's never going to happen. It's so much more important that you just get out there and do something and not even worry about, is it perfect? Am I going to have an interference effect? Should I do, higher frequency, smaller volume each day? Should I just do it once a week, a whole lot, every day, a little bit, somewhere in between? I mean, honestly, I do think the answer is always somewhere in between, right? Yeah. So if you compare doing, 1 second of exercise every hour forever, or 50 hours of exercise once a year, like on the frequency ends. Like the ends of that frequency spectrum are going to be terrible. And the answer is always somewhere in between. So I always like somewhere in the middle where you're doing, instead of maybe every day or just once a week, you're doing like, 3 times a week or something like that, somewhere in between. And then you want your volumes to kind of match that. And so I don't think there is any perfect or optimal though, but you want to be somewhere in the middle, and you do want to just get out there and exercise and not worry about perfect, because that's just not going to happen. It's mythical.
Yeah, for sure. It is totally mythical. So VO2 max is really important for your, for someone's body composition, their carbohydrate need, and also longevity. What is the role of, and that kind of, we are talking about VO2 max for longevity, but also really for carbohydrate need. What about fat? Where do you typically think about a fat range? And then we should probably talk about fiber as well.
Right. So for me, the protein is absolutely critical. It's primary. You have to nail that. The carbs, you do want to dial that with your need for carbohydrate. And then fat is kind of what's left over. Fat is very, very passive. It's not really doing anything great for anyone. The satiety from it is so delayed that it's not, it's just not that helpful in the short term.
Right.
No one's getting a performance boost from it in the short term. It's just kind of there. It's, you have to eat some. It's a really good thing to trim down a little bit if you're trying to eat less calories. But it's something that you don't want too high or too low. The interesting thing about fat is when we have all these studies where we force people to either crank their fat percent way up or way down, they always end up just coming right back to this like 30% fat zone, right? Like, so even in studies where we intentionally try to have people eat a very high fat diet or a very low fat diet, they all come back to this like, okay, fat's like a third of your calories, 28 to 35%, this kind of 30% fat zone seems to be where people just naturally aim for. And so for me with fat, it's basically kind of the passive leftover macronutrient. And I end up, most people are eating about 0.5 gram per pound of ideal body weight. So, protein and carbs might be 1 gram per pound, and fat might be 0.5 gram per pound of ideal body weight. And that might be a good ballpark place to put it. And then again, you're eating more fat if you're doing more cardio at a lower, like if you're doing more zone 2 cardio or something, if your job gives you a step count of 30,000 steps because you're a UPS delivery driver and you're doing a lot of this lower intensity stuff where you're just burning tons of fat, you need more calories. That's going to, eating more fat is where that's going to come from. I do think it's pretty easy to eat the right amount if you're choosing the right foods. You know what I mean? So most people don't have to really worry about it too much.
I think I absolutely agree with you. And I think that that's really valuable. In terms of how important do you think it is for people to track calories? Do you think that that's a necessary thing for people to track it routinely, or does it depend on their goal, whether they're in weight maintenance, weight loss? What are your thoughts on that?
Everyone should track briefly just to know what it's about and know how it works and, see what they're eating just roughly. It's interesting. It's cool. It's something good to know, but calories are basically a kind of a joke, kind of worthless. It's just not that helpful, because even if you did calculate how many calories you're burning or how many you need or where you should be, it's going to change every single day. People eat way more calories one day and then they just automatically way less calories the next day. And your body sort of auto-regulates this. And as long as your exercise level is high enough, you'll do a really good job of pulling calories, basically matching your intake to your expenditure. But where we get into trouble is when people are super sedentary. So these studies show that if you're really sedentary, you just eat way more calories than your body needs. For some reason, it seems to break hunger and satiety signaling. So as you get more and more active, if you're like moderately active, okay, now you're doing a pretty good job of matching your calories intake to expenditure. And then exercise more and more and more, you get really good at matching intake to expenditure, right? You might be burning 10,000 calories a day and eating exactly 10,000 calories a day, and it gets really tightly matched at higher energy fluxes, higher energy throughput if you're burning more and eating more. And so I think for most people, trying to count calories and calculate calories and manipulate calories is a joke, because the big picture is that every human eats until they're full. That's how the system works. You eat to satiety, period, full stop. Long-term, big picture, zooming way out, everybody eats till they're full, end of story. And then what we've got is people who are eating till they're full, but they happen to just eat way too many calories because they had a bunch of refined carbs, refined fats, and you just passively get way more calories that way. And so I think counting calories is kind of a joke. It's kind of bad. It's not going to work long term, but I mean, it is interesting. It is cool, and people should do it for a period of time just to know what tracking is all about.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice, and people can use either the Carbon app or Chronometer. There's a ton of different apps to kind of figure out what that looks like. What do you think about in terms of an individual who's weight loss resistant? They say that they've tried everything and they can't lose weight. What would be a strategy for that individual?
I mean, I would say 99% of the time in the real world, when I see clients who are weight loss resistant, their volume of exercise is way lower than I think it should be. Let's put it that way. So most of your weight loss resistant people have spent 99% of their effort on the diet side. They're constantly trying to eat less calories, shave down those calories. How can I eat one less calorie? And they're just cranking so hard on the diet lever. They've got this vast amount of exercise lever that they just never tap into. And so I would tell that person, okay, the second you wake up in the morning, you have to go walk an hour on the treadmill. That's it. And when you start out, you could walk 1 mile an hour, totally flat. Just watch YouTube videos, just watch TV mindlessly. Just get out of bed, go get on the treadmill for an hour, and watch TV. And then what you do is you just progressively overload that. Now you go faster, and now you go a little steeper, and you want to eventually get to the point where you're burning 800 calories doing this. And then what ends up happening is your calorie burn is so much higher that you just automatically start matching your intake to your expenditure, and you just you'll probably end up eating the exact same number of calories, but since you burn more and you're matching better, you're going to lose weight. You know what I'm saying? So it turns out that everybody is burning and eating the exact same amount of calories everywhere, everyone, period. Like all this Herman Ponzer stuff, all of Herman Ponzer's.
What is that? Tell me what that is.
So I love Herman Ponzer, and he wrote this book called Burn. And he he did all these doubly labeled water studies on the Hadza. And what he found out is freaking everybody's eating and burning the exact same number of calories, right? You got this Hadza male who's eating and burning like 2,700 calories a day. And then you've got a US male who's eating and burning maybe 2,900 calories a day. I mean, there's almost no difference between them, right? And if they try to eat less or burn less, it doesn't work. Your body just wants to eat and burn the same amount of calories. The difference between them is that the US male on average is like 198 pounds.
Okay.
And the Hadza is like 139 pounds or something.
Okay.
Less than half the body fat percentage. But the US male is doing 4,000 step count a day, and the Hadza is doing 20,000 step count a day. The US is doing 4 or 5 minutes of exercise a day. The Hadza is doing 2.5 hours of exercise a day, mostly walking, So it turns out basically you're going to burn the same amount of energy and eat the same amount of energy, no matter what. But you can burn it by either just having a bigger body and way more fat mass and just sitting on the couch all day, or being super skinny and walking 20,000 steps a day. But you're going to eat and burn the same either way. And so once you kind of realize that, you see that, oh, if I just try to shave my calories lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, and lower, that is absolutely not going to work. You know what I
No,
mean?
it's not.
So now you're like, okay, I'm going to eat a lot, and I can either burn it by weighing 500 pounds and sitting on the couch all day, or being thinner and walking 20,000 steps. And so, like, I think you just got to get to the point where you make this trade-off of physical activity as being the way you're burning all the calories you're just going to eat, instead of sitting there completely motionless and being huge. I mean, it's the same calorie burn either way. Now, Herman Ponzer does not like me or my interpretation of his research.
How could someone not like you?
I mean, I'm okay. So, like, I love Herman Ponzer. He does not appreciate my interpretation of his work, and and that's okay. It's totally okay. So I don't think he likes to spin on putting on it. But that's the reality, right? The reality is you can be thinner and move more, or you can be fatter and move less, and you're going to eat and burn the same amount of calories either way.
I love that. I love that. How long do you think it starts? You know, what you're saying is really important in this way, that the more sedentary we are, you know, people think that you're going to eat less, right? Because you're not training, that there's going to be a hunger mechanism, but basically it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems to kind of dysregulate. How long do you think that it takes? And again, this might be whatever, an arbitrary number, but how long do you think it takes for a re-regulation? Is there a way where we could say, okay, in 4 weeks, you're going to start to see that your hunger is going to re-regulate? Do we have any concept of what that looks like?
Oh, wow. I don't really know. I mean, like, I have a feel for what I've just seen, but it is very gradual, and it is on the order of weeks to months. And the thing that makes it hard is it's really hard to start that exercise part when you already weigh so much and you're already burning so many calories just having a larger body, right? So these people who are super overweight are burning a lot of calories, and then if they try to exercise, the cost of that activity is huge. So it's a really, really hard, almost impossible. And that's why so many people have to start on the diet side first, right? So you do actually work on your diet, lose a little bit of weight, and then you do have more energy availability to start doing more exercise. So we see this really smooth shift where, as you work on the diet and lose weight, and get a little bit lighter, you can actually start doing more exercise. And then what you have to do is just keep smoothly ramping up the exercise as you get a smaller body. And then long term, you have to keep exercising at a really high level forever, or you're just going to regain, right? So you're going to, if you stop exercising, your body wants to eat and burn the same amount. So you're going to eat the same amount, and then you're going to, if you're not burning with exercise, you're just going to get a larger body again. And that's why we see so much yo-yo dieting and so much weight regain after people lose weight. But I think, to answer your question, it is very slow. It is very gradual. It's weeks to months. You do have to gradually ramp up the exercise as you're losing weight simultaneously, just to have that energy availability. And so it probably is useful to start on the diet side. But a lot of these diet resistant people never really stepped up the exercise, and they're just not getting their calorie burn high enough so they can still eat a lot of calories, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have this one patient that I'm thinking of, and he says he's tried everything. He's also even on semaglutide or Wegovy and still struggling. But the missing piece for him is truly, even though he is now not consuming a lot of food, I think his metabolism, obviously there's that metabolic adaptation that's really, doesn't require a ton of food, even if he's a bigger guy, even if he's eating 1,200 calories, I think he's struggling to lose weight because this metabolic adaptation, he's got to improve that exercise, even with a drug agent on board.
Yep. Yeah. He wants to eat and burn 2,700 calories a day, just like a Hadza.
Yeah.
And so you might as well just roll out of bed, get on the treadmill, do at least half an hour, if not an hour, somewhere in that range, 30 to 60 minutes. And you also want to progressively overload that, where when you start out, you just go as slow and flat as you want. until you've done it a couple dozen times and it's a habit, and then you just progressively overload. Every time you do it, you try to go a little faster and a little steeper.
Yeah.
Till a couple of years down the road, you're just running up at 12% grade for an hour, and then you have like the VO2 max of a Olympic athlete, and you're just completely ripped and jacked.
Yeah.
And so it's progressive overload, but you have to invest some amount of physical activity if you're going to ever be optimal anything.
I love that. I love that. And just one more question. Where do you see resistance exercise plays a role in this? You think I mean, because you're obviously going to stimulate muscle doing some of this high intensity. Do you think that resistance exercise is critical, or how do you place that in your strategy?
Right. So for me, there's three types of exercise that absolutely everyone has to be doing, and they are completely separate in my mind. The way I think about it, they're completely separate. You have resistance exercise over here, which is critical as hell, and this is the only way you're going to build muscle and maximize muscle mass. And along with VO2 max, the other two things that are most associated with longevity and health span is strength and then muscle mass, right? So you want to be strong, you want to have a lot of muscle. You will only get that with resistance exercise. You'll only get more muscle with resistance exercise, and you'll only get more strength with really heavy, really hard resistance exercise. I'm talking 70% of your 1 rep max or higher, ideally, if you're trying to get those strength adaptations. So everyone needs to be doing resistance exercise in a very targeted, very specific way, where you're hitting absolute failure in a movement pattern, push-pull legs, and ideally doing heavy enough that you're getting all the strength adaptations that you want out of that. So doing at least some of your work in a 70-80% of your 1 rep max, I'm talking 10 reps, hitting failure in 10 reps or lower. And you want to do some of that at least twice a week. 3 times a week is probably better. And it really comes down to number of sets per week. So you could do a little bit every day. You could do a whole bunch once a week. But again, optimal is probably somewhere in between, where you're doing 2 to 4 times a week, moderate volume instead of like all of it on one day or a little bit on every day. And but that's resistance training, right? You want to be very specific, very targeted, hit absolute failure in all of your muscles, push-pull legs, full body, high intensity of effort, ideally a fairly high load as well. Don't hurt yourself. Don't like PR on, don't do singles on every lift, but you want to do something fairly heavy. That's okay. So that's resistance, right? Then there's like this VO2 high intensity cardio I was talking about, where you're trying to redline your heart rate, and you're trying to do some zone 5, and you're trying to really tax your cardiorespiratory system. So you get these positive adaptations, you get a bigger cardiac stroke output, and you get all this sort of thing. And then there's this kind of other cardio, general movement bucket, where, you want to hit 10,000 steps a day. You want to just be moderately active. You want to just burn a certain amount of calories in general physical movement. That could be your job or just activities of daily living. Or if you are a super sedentary job, you might have to do this hour on the treadmill I'm talking about. That's your just basic movement. Now there's overlaps between these 3 different forms of exercise, but you pretty much want to think about it as like high-end cardio, maximum effort, resistance training, and then step count, general movement, burning a certain amount of calories with physical activity in general. And so for me, it's like these 3 different things that everyone absolutely has to be doing some way or another.
I love that. I love that. Dr. Ted, you are amazing. I am going to link where everybody can find you. It's so valuable. I could go on. I'm sparing you right now. And if you guys are interested, you can listen to our podcast that we did, and we are going to be doing another one, because again, he is, do you know that your episode has been one of the most popular episodes?
No, but thank you. Okay, that's cool.
And do you know that today, actually, I was ranked 4th in all medicine in the US?
What?
Yeah.
Cool.
We're moving on up.
Awesome.
Moving on up. Yeah. New podcast, but still it is growing. So we're going to bring you back, obviously, to do another episode. And I'm going to link where everybody can find you. You're very active on Twitter. You have a lot of good information on Twitter, and they can find a lot of your interviews online and Diet Doctor, all the things. I'm going to link it. thank you for sharing this very practical information for the optimal body RX. You're amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.